I grew up in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, a place where not much ever really happens. Finding something fun to do was always a bit of a challenge. Back in high school, my friends and I used to sneak into abandoned buildings for some cheap thrills. That was our go-to form of entertainment. I didn't realize until years later just how common this kind of thing is. Apparently, exploring abandoned places is a popular pastime. There was this deserted church in Narberth we had been to a couple of times before. I can even recall the address, 198 Elmwood Avenue. It was a creepy spot, but it became our usual hangout for spooky late-night adventures. One chilly fall evening, we decided to check it out again, bringing along some drinks. The air had that sharp, crisp feeling that comes with autumn night. There were 6 of us: me, Luna, Gina, Johnny, Max, and Ally. To get into the church, we had to scale an 8-foot chain-link fence since the gates were long gone. The front doors were all boarded up, so our usual entry point was a side window that had been smashed out years ago. Once inside, the first thing you'd notice was the ground, or rather, the lack of a proper floor. The entire first level had been stripped down to dirt, as though someone had ripped up all the floorboards ages ago. There was a gaping hole in the middle of the room, leading to a set of concrete stairs descending into the basement. That was always our final destination, the basement. The basement was divided into 3 sections, but only one of them had an actual door. The others just had open frames. The largest of the 3 rooms was where we usually hung out. There wasn't much there, just old, broken furniture, a few chairs, a battered couch. Johnny, ever the lightweight, was being obnoxiously loud despite having only a little alcohol in him. I kept shushing him, trying to keep the noise down. Being in a group always felt safer though, so I wasn't too worried. We were having a good time, talking, laughing, and maybe playing some music on a small speaker. My memory's a bit fuzzy on that. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a door slam. The noise was so sudden and loud that I literally jumped. All of us froze, exchanging wide-eyed looks. At first, I thought one of us might have accidentally shut the door, but no one was near it. Without hesitation, Luna, Gina, and Johnny bolted for the stairs, leaving just me, Max, and Ally behind. We were the braver ones, or maybe just the more reckless. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't ready to run just yet. Max and Ally seemed to feel the same way. After a minute of standing in tense silence, curiosity, or perhaps stupidity, got the better of us. We decided to check it out. Cautiously, we approached the door that had slammed shut. Behind it was a small room, and the first thing that caught my eye was a dresser. Its mirror was cracked, and streaks of a reddish substance were smeared across it. At first, I thought it was old paint, but as I got closer, I realized something chilling. It wasn't completely dry. The substance had a sticky sheen, like it had been left there recently. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was beginning to regret staying behind. Then I noticed an old black and white photograph on top of the dresser. It was a picture of a woman in a wedding dress. She was smiling, but there was something unsettling about her expression. A sense of unease washed over me. Before I could say anything, we heard another sound, this time coming from the room we had just been in. It wasn't a door, it sounded like something moving. That was enough for Max and Ally. They both decided it was time to go, and I wasn't about to argue. We grabbed our things and made a beeline for the stairs. As we climbed back through the window and scrambled over the fence, none of us said a word. But just before I jumped down, I glanced back at the church. In the dim light, I could swear I saw a shadowy figure standing in the open window we had just climbed through. To this day, I pray that my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. My friends and I never returned to that church as a group. Even after all these years, the memory of that night sticks with me. I did go back to the site once, long after the church had been torn down. It had been completely demolished, leaving no trace of the building that once stood there. I never figured out what we encountered that night, and I suppose I never will. If anyone reading this wants to dig into the history of 198 Elmwood Avenue, be my guest. I never found anything online, but I wouldn't be surprised if that place had some dark secrets buried with it. I work for a catering company, which means I spend a lot of time on the road, often during late-night hours. My job mostly involves hauling equipment and supplies from one place to another in a giant truck provided by the company. It's not the worst gig, but the hours are brutal, and it's far from the life I imagined for myself. By the time I get home, I'm either buzzing from too much caffeine to sleep or so exhausted that I crash instantly for 12 hours straight. One night, I was driving home around 2 a.m., relieved to be back in my own car instead of that massive truck. As I got closer to my house, I realized the Red Bulls I'd guzzled were kicking in hard, and there was no chance I'd be able to sleep anytime soon. On top of that, I was starving. I hadn't eaten in hours. There's a McDonald's off the highway about 10 minutes from my house. It's my go-to spot for late-night munchies because of how convenient it is. I don't usually overdo it on fast food, but every now and then I get this specific craving that only some fries can fix. Being a 24-hour spot, it seemed like the perfect solution to my predicament. When I pulled into the drive-thru, it was well past 2 a.m., and I was surprised to see a few cars ahead of me. This McDonald's wasn't exactly a bustling location, especially not at that hour. As I sat there waiting, my eyes wandered, and I noticed something unusual. An old, battered Volkswagen parked in the farthest corner of the lot. Its windows were tinted, and it seemed odd for someone to be parked there since the dining area was closed, and employees had designated spaces elsewhere. I figured it was just someone eating in their car, something I'd done myself occasionally, but it still seemed out of place. After grabbing my food, I decided I didn't want to go straight home. I wasn't ready to end the night but also didn't want to just sit in my car. I thought about where I could enjoy my meal and remembered a nature preserve near my house. The preserve, a sprawling forested area on a mountain, had a scenic overlook at the top offering breathtaking views of the city. A road loops around the preserve, leading straight to the peak. During the day, it's a popular spot, but after hours, the preserve is closed, and the road is blocked to vehicles. Still, it's accessible by foot, and I thought the nostalgia of revisiting a favorite high school hangout would be a nice change of pace. When I arrived at the gravel parking area near the preserve, it was completely deserted. Just as I was about to turn off my engine, headlights appeared, pulling into the lot. It was unsettling enough to see another car at this hour, but my heart sank when I recognized it. It was the same Volkswagen from McDonald's. I parked some distance away and turned off my engine, uneasiness creeping in. What were the chances of that car showing up here too? Had they followed me? I rolled my window down slightly, straining to hear any sounds. The car stayed silent, with no music or movement. After a few tense minutes, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were there for the same reason I was. Still, the situation didn't sit right. Feeling uneasy, I FaceTimed a close friend, Sebastian, who lived nearby. If he didn't pick up, I planned to eat in my car and head home. Luckily, he answered, saying he'd been up working on a paper. I persuaded him to join me, and he agreed to be there in 10 minutes. While waiting, I kept an eye on the Volkswagen, which remained still. When Sebastian arrived, I felt a wave of relief. We both got out of our cars and started walking up the path to the lookout. Before we left the lot behind, I glanced back. The Volkswagen's doors had opened and 4 men stepped out. They stood there silently, looking around at each other without speaking. The sight sent a chill down my spine. I nudged Sebastian, who noticed them too. We quickly continued up the trail, putting the parking lot out of view. Alarm bells were ringing in my head, but Sebastian shrugged it off, saying they were probably just there to smoke. By the time we reached the overlook, the city lights were enough to distract me. We sat on the stone wall bordering the edge of the mountain, talking and eating like old times. But our peace was short-lived. Voices and laughter echoed from the trail behind us. 3 men were approaching, one of them holding a blunt. They seemed friendly enough at first, easing some of my tension. Instead of finding their own spot, though, they walked straight up to us, as if wanting to strike up a conversation. The guy with the blunt, covered in tattoos with a nose ring, smiled faintly and offered us a smoke. We both declined, prompting one of his friends to laugh and call us names. Sebastian brushed it off, but I couldn't help myself. I asked about the McDonald's parking lot. The blunt guy's smile vanished, his eyes narrowing. His friend's expressions turned cold as well. The silence stretched on uncomfortably. That's when I remembered. There had been 4 guys in the car, not 3. One was missing. My instincts screamed to run. Finally, the guy spoke, claiming he worked nights and had just finished his shift. He pulled up his hoodie to reveal a McDonald's uniform, as if to prove his story. He added that he and his friends came here regularly to unwind after work. Although his explanation calmed me slightly, something still felt wrong. Sebastian and I decided it was time to leave. As we started down the path, Sebastian suddenly pointed into the trees. I followed his gaze and saw the 4th guy lurking in the shadows, holding something I couldn't make out. The moment he noticed us looking, he started moving. We ran. We sprinted down the trail, their footsteps pounding behind us. My heart felt like it would explode, but I didn't dare look back. We reached the parking lot, dove into our cars, and sped off. As I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw them scrambling to get into their vehicle. I called Sebastian and suggested we meet on his street instead of going straight home, just in case we were being followed. Fortunately, it didn't seem like they were chasing us, but we weren't taking chances. When we met up, we were both shaken. Sebastian showed me a photo he'd taken of the group while they weren't looking. The next day, we went back to McDonald's and spoke to a young employee, showing him the picture and recounting what happened. The employee's face paled. He explained that the guy in the photo used to work there but had been fired after stalking and harassing his ex-girlfriend, who also worked at that location. The police had issued a restraining order against him, but he'd apparently been violating it by camping in the parking lot. Sebastian and I were horrified. It was clear this guy was unhinged. I'm praying the police catch him before he causes more trouble. In the meantime, I'm avoiding that McDonald's and the preserve for the foreseeable future. In the winter of 2012, I found myself staying late at the library. The sun had already set, leaving the surroundings dark and quiet. It was evening, and the usual buzz of my friends studying alongside me was absent. I couldn't recall why they hadn't shown up. As I gathered my things, the library announced it was closing in 5 minutes. I was so focused on my studies because I had a test in just 3 days. I packed my books into my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and headed toward the library exit. It was eerily quiet, so much so that the silence felt loud. Libraries are typically quiet, but this felt different. I seemed to be the only one there, except for the librarian. When I stepped outside, I was hit by the freezing cold. The temperature had dropped significantly, and there was no one else around on the campus. I walked all the way back to my dorm, but something unsettling happened before I reached home. About halfway there, I had to cross a major road. The campus was divided into 2 sections by a highway, which was a strange design. I'm not sure why it was built that way, but there was a highway running through it. Crossing it during the day was no big deal, but at night it felt a little more challenging. There was a large flight of stairs that went over the highway, essentially a bridge you could walk on to cross. I always thought it was a neat feature, and when I traveled to Europe and the UK, I noticed they had a lot of them. They're pretty common there, but not so much where I'm from. I reached the stairs and started climbing, carefully watching my step. It was only the beginning of winter, so there wasn't much snow yet, but the temperatures were icy. I was bundled up in warm clothes, wearing a beanie and a scarf, but still freezing. My nose felt numb and tingly, which made it even worse. I reached the top of the first set of stairs and began walking across the platform to the other side. As I walked, I noticed a few cars passing by. The traffic had slowed down by then, probably because rush hour was over. Most people had already headed home. It was around 7 p.m., so there were only a few cars left. Everything seemed fine until I reached the end of the platform. As I was about to descend the second set of stairs, I noticed something strange. The speed limit on the highway was 80, maybe even faster, but there was one van that was driving incredibly slowly, almost crawling. It seemed out of place. I thought maybe they were lost, but how does one get lost on a highway? I kept walking toward the stairs, getting closer to the van, which was moving at a snail's pace. As I got nearer, it looked like the van might stop right at the bottom of the stairs. At that point, I started feeling nervous. There was something off about the situation. I continued walking cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible while avoiding their gaze. By the time I was halfway down the stairs, I could see the van had stopped at the bottom step. I could barely make out the two men sitting inside, their faces hidden in the darkness. I could only see their mouths, and by their jawlines, I could tell they were men. I slowed my pace, pretending to be careful about the ice, but my instincts told me something wasn't right. If their van had broken down, they would have put on their hazard lights, but they didn't do that. They just sat there, watching me, following my every move. That was enough. I turned around and started running back up the stairs toward campus. In my panic, I slipped on the ice and fell, landing hard on my forearms. I used my arms to catch myself, and the pain was sharp. The concrete steps felt like they shattered my bones. I pushed through the pain, getting back on my feet. My arms ached, but I didn't care at that moment. I just wanted to get away from them. I started running even faster, breathing heavily and panicking with every step. I thought I heard the van's door open and close behind me, which only made me run faster. I reached the other staircase, which would take me back down to the campus, and didn't even think about the ice as I kept running, skipping steps, nearly falling again. But I made it down the first step without slipping. I couldn't bring myself to look back. The thought of them being right behind me was terrifying. I finally made it back to the university campus and rushed into the library. Thankfully, the librarian hadn't locked the doors yet, so I dashed inside, ran up the stairs, and found an employee. I told them everything that had just happened. Within 2 minutes, the security team arrived, followed by the police and paramedic. It turned out I had fractured both forearms. The police checked the highway's CCTV footage and confirmed that the men had stopped by the road. They even caught me slipping on camera, as some of the streetlights had cameras attached to them. This allowed them to track the men's movements, but the van's license plates were invalid, so they couldn't trace them. In the end, the men's identities remained unknown. From that day on, I never walk home at night, especially when it's dark. I've always found comfort in late-night walks. There's something about the calmness that makes everything feel less complicated. I'm a welder by profession and have been at it for over 4 decades now. I live alone on a large farm, just me and my dog Bosley. The house is far too big for one person, but I couldn't bring myself to downsize after my wife, Maria, passed away. My kids moved out long ago, and ever since cancer took her, it's just been me and Bosley. One evening, after a grueling day in the shop, I decided to take a stroll. My property's quite expansive, so a single lap is usually enough to satisfy my restlessness. The air was crisp, and Bosley trotted faithfully at my side. Sometimes I think he loves me more than I deserve. I've walked that loop countless times, but as I neared the house, something unusual caught my attention. I glanced up at the second-story window, the one from the bedroom Maria and I used to share. For a brief moment I thought I saw movement. I froze, staring at the glass. No one had any reason to be in there. I hadn't set foot in that room for years. The thought of someone invading my space sent my blood boiling. I wasn't about to let it slide. I rushed inside, my heart pounding, and climbed the stairs 2 at a time. When I reached the room, it was exactly as I'd left it, untouched. I checked every corner and cranny but found no trace of anything unusual. I felt a mix of relief and embarrassment, figuring it must have been my imagination. But standing there, I couldn't shake the gut feeling that something had been there, even if only for a moment. The following night, I woke to the sound of Bosley growling. He's a quiet dog, never makes noise unless there's a reason. I sat up, ears straining. That's when I heard the faint sound of creaking above me. It could have been the house settling, but my mind immediately went to footsteps, and they were coming from directly overhead, the same room. I considered grabbing my hunting rifle from downstairs but decided against it. If it came to it, I was confident I could handle the situation barehanded. Grabbing my flashlight, I went upstairs to investigate. The room was unchanged, just like before. My initial anger had now turned to unease. Something about the house felt wrong. The night after, I came downstairs to find the kitchen lights blazing. I knew I'd turn them off before going to bed. There was no longer any doubt. Someone was in my house. Panic set in. I called the police, explaining my suspicions. They arrived promptly and conducted a thorough search, but they found nothing. The officers were polite, reassured me to call again if needed, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. That night was the worst yet. I couldn't sleep and decided to check the upstairs room again, hoping it might put my mind at ease. When I opened the door, I froze. Clothes were strewn across the floor, Maria's clothes. I had packed them away after her passing. Now they were scattered everywhere. This wasn't random, it was deliberate. And then I saw her. A woman stood in the doorway, staring directly at me. I couldn't make out her face, but I could tell she wasn't Maria. She was too short. Whoever she was, she didn't belong here. My fear turned to instinct, and I charged toward her. She spun and bolted, darting down the stairs and out the front door. By the time I reached the yard, she was gone. Bosley and I scoured the property, but there was no sign of her. I didn't sleep that night. For months afterward, I barely rested, jumping at every creak and noise. I kept my rifle by my bedside, dreading the thought of having to use it. I thought about calling my brother to stay with me but decided against it. I was raised to handle my problems on my own. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I noticed a figure standing outside, staring at me through the window. It was her again. My chest tightened, and I grabbed my rifle, bolting out the door with Bosley close behind. She stood motionless, silhouetted in the moonlight. I fired a few warning shots into the air, hoping to scare her off. She finally turned and fled into the darkness, but the encounter did nothing to ease my mind. I was being harassed by some random woman, maybe homeless, maybe not. I couldn't fathom why this was happening to me. I stood in the yard for what felt like hours, waiting to see if she'd come back. She didn't. I haven't seen her since, but deep down, I know it's only a matter of time. I'm prepared to defend myself, but living in constant fear like this is no way to exist. Thank God for Bosley. I don't know what I'd do without him. I'll send an update if anything else happens. If those nightmares about walking alone at night gave you chills, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales. What would you have done in those situations? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves horror stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.